The letter arrived on an ordinary Thursday, but Laura had no idea it would change the course of her life. The mansion, with its marble floors and endless rooms, had always been a world of secrets. But tonight, those secrets were about to reveal themselves. For years, Laura had been invisible here, just a maid, unnoticed by the wealthy, living in the shadows. But now, the silence of the mansion would be broken. Have you ever discovered that the person you love isn't who they claim to be? Laura was about to uncover the truth behind a man she had worked for, a man who had built an empire but was now trapped by his own guilt. When the man you married has been living a lie, how do you move forward? Laura stood there, staring at the letter, her heart racing. She had no idea how deep the lies ran. Would you forgive someone who hid their entire identity, even if it was for love? The question lingered in the air, and as she walked toward the study, she knew the answers she sought would change everything. Laura had spent nearly 3 years in this mansion, each day blending into the next, a silent observer to a life she would never be a part of. The grandeur of the estate, the opulence that filled every room, was a world that never saw her, that never noticed the quiet maid who worked tirelessly in the background. She didn't belong here, not in the way that the family did, but she had learned to live with that fact. Her days were spent in shadows, cleaning, dusting, and making sure the house ran smoothly. But the weight of it all was heavy, suffocating even. The loneliness that clung to her felt like a constant presence in her life. The death of her mother years ago had carved a hollow space inside her heart, one she hadn't quite figured out how to fill. In this mansion of endless rooms and silent halls, she was invisible. The mansion's secrets, its stories of power and wealth, lived in its walls, but Laura? She was just a ghost, moving unnoticed through it all. The invitation to meet Mr. Grayson, the man who had built this empire, felt like a dream, a mysterious letter, a summons to a place she had never been allowed, to a man she had served from a distance. For years, he had been a towering figure of the household, never seen but always felt. The idea that he would call for her, that he would notice her, made something stir inside her. For the first time, she wondered if her quiet world might be on the verge of changing. The mansion was eerily quiet as Laura made her way to the study, the grand hall stretching endlessly in front of her. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the vastness, and for a moment, she felt as though the mansion itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The letter had given her no explanation, just a simple instruction: meet me at the study. Midnight. Don't let anyone know. The air in the study was thick with silence. As she opened the door, Laura was met with the sight of Mr. Grayson sitting by the window, his frail figure bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. The towering, commanding figure she had always known now seemed small, hunched, his once vibrant eyes now dimmed by age and illness. Laura, his voice broke the silence, gruff and weak. You came. She didn't know what to say. Words fell out of place in this room filled with unspoken history. She stepped inside slowly, keeping her distance. He didn't seem to notice her hesitation. You've worked here longer than anyone, but no one truly sees you, do they? People like you, you're invisible. But invisible people see things others miss. You've been watching, haven't you? Laura felt a shiver crawl down her spine. She had always kept to herself, stayed in the background, never daring to venture into the lives of people she served. She wasn't supposed to be seen. Yet here she was, being addressed by the very man who owned the house, the empire, the power. What is it you need from me? Laura asked, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. Mr. Grayson leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her nervous. I need you to help me before it's too late. I've spent my life building this empire, but I've neglected the one thing that mattered the most. His voice cracked with emotion, the years of regret filling the space between them. The vulnerability in his voice was raw, unguarded. She had never seen him like this, never thought she would. She felt a strange pull toward him, as though his pain was somehow becoming hers. "Help me," he repeated, a hint of desperation creeping into his words. "Before I die, I need to make things right. I need to find him." The weight of Mr. Grayson's request lingered in the air between them. His voice, low and filled with regret, echoed in Lara's mind. She had always seen him as a distant figure, cold, imposing, a man whose wealth and power had built this empire. But now, in the dimly lit study, he seemed human, vulnerable, as if the walls of his success had crumbled away to reveal a man consumed by a lifetime of mistakes. "I've built this," he said, gesturing vaguely around the room. "But at what cost?" Lara remained silent, unsure what to say, yet drawn into his confession. "Elsie," he continued, his eyes clouded with memories. "She was the one I loved, and I lost her." The name lingered in the air like a forgotten song, one that held the weight of years of unspoken pain. Lara could sense the deep ache in his voice, the regret that seemed to swallow him whole. "She left," Mr. Grayson whispered, his eyes drifting far away as if he were looking back in time. "I was blind to what I had with her. And now it's too late." The sadness in his voice felt almost foreign to Lara, as though she were hearing a version of him she had never known. The man who had always been the pillar of this house, the untouchable figure, was now admitting his failure. She could feel the rawness of his pain, and for the first time it was clear that the wealth and status he had fought for had come at the cost of something far more valuable, something that no amount of money could bring back. "I never found her," he continued, his voice growing softer, almost pleading. "I failed her. I failed my son. And now I'm going to die without making it right, without seeing him one last time." Lara's heart clenched. She had always known Mr. Grayson to be a distant figure, a man of authority, but here he was, confessing to a loss so great that it shaped the very core of who he had become. The thought of a son, hidden from the world, lost in the shadows of time, struck Lara deeply. "There's someone you need to find," Mr. Grayson said, his voice shaking slightly, a tremor of vulnerability in his words. "My son, Damien, he's out there, and I don't know where he is. But you do. You'll find him, won't you?" Lara swallowed, the weight of the task settling heavily on her shoulders. She had no idea where to begin. She was just a maid, a shadow in a mansion of untold stories. But something about his request, the sheer desperation in his eyes, made her wonder if maybe this was the one thing she could do, if this was her chance to do something more than just clean the rooms and dust the shelves. She nodded slowly, her mind racing with the impossibility of it all. "I'll find him." The weight of Mr. Grayson's words sat heavily on Lara's chest as she stepped out of the study. His plea was clear, yet the task seemed impossible. How could she, a maid in this sprawling mansion, find a man Mr. Grayson hadn't seen in decades? The idea felt overwhelming, but there was something about the vulnerability in his voice, something that stirred within her. She had never seen this side of him, and the thought of him dying with this regret weighed on her. As she walked back to her small quarters, the halls of the mansion felt colder, emptier. Her mind kept circling back to the same question. Why her? Why had Mr. Grayson, with all his resources, chosen her? But deep down, she knew the answer. She was invisible, yes, but she also saw things others didn't, and that had made her the one person he trusted. Her emotions were in turmoil. She had always stayed in the background, keeping to herself, afraid to draw attention. But now, the shadows that had once been her refuge had become her burden. She was about to take on a task far larger than anything she had ever imagined. The following day, Lara began her search, though she had no idea where to start. She couldn't just walk into a police station or hire a detective. There were no easy answers in this world. The son, Damien, had to be somewhere, but where? Lara's mind wandered as she tried to piece together the puzzle. She thought about the few conversations she had overheard about Mr. Grayson's past, the bits of information she had picked up over the years working in the mansion. There was something about the fire that had torn apart the Grayson family, and the whispers of Mr. Grayson's first love, Elsie. The fire had taken much more than just physical things. It had destroyed the family bond, leaving only ashes behind. As Laura walked through the streets of the city, she found herself increasingly unsure of how to proceed. She didn't have much to go on, just a name. A man who had never been acknowledged, abandoned by a father who had turned his back in pursuit of greatness. Damien was more than just a name to her now. He was a person with a story, a life that had been shaped by pain, much like her own. Laura found herself standing outside a small cafe, the crisp air biting at her skin. She hadn't realized how far her feet had taken her, lost in thought. As she turned back to head toward the mansion, a man stepped out of the cafe. He was tall, with dark features that made him look strikingly familiar. His face, it was him. The man's eyes caught hers, and for a moment, everything felt suspended in time. There was a quiet recognition, a brief flash that only Laura could understand. The resemblance to Mr. Grayson was undeniable. Without thinking, Laura approached him. "Damien?" she asked softly, unsure she was even pronouncing the name right. He looked at her, a flash of recognition crossing his face. He said nothing at first, just stared, as though weighing her. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice hard. I work for Mr. Grayson," Laura replied, her voice steady despite the nervous pounding of her heart. "He wants to see you." The man's eyes darkened. "I don't know who you are or what you're talking about, but I'm not interested in anything your boss has to say." Laura took a deep breath, knowing she had only one chance to make this work. "Mr. Grayson is dying," she said softly. "He's asking for you. He's lived with the regret of never finding you for so many years. All he wants is to see you before it's too late." Damien's expression softened for the briefest of moments before he turned away. "It's too late for him," he muttered, his words full of bitterness. "It's too late for all of us." The pain in his voice made Lara's heart ache. She could see it now, the weight of the years of anger and hurt Damien carried. She understood that better than anyone. Loss, betrayal, and abandonment were familiar companions to her. But even in his anger, there was something else, a softness that reminded her of the man she had just left behind in the study. She couldn't help but wonder if they were more alike than either of them realized. "Please," Laura said, reaching out gently to him. "Just come. See him. He needs to know you, and you need to know him." Damien stood still for a moment, his eyes narrowed, as if weighing Lara's words against years of pain and confusion. The silence between them stretched, thick and heavy, like an invisible wall that neither of them could break through. Laura felt her heart pounding in her chest, every second feeling like a lifetime. Finally he spoke. His voice was low, almost himself. "You don't know what it's like to be abandoned, to be nothing but a shadow of what you should have been." Lara's hand trembled slightly as she stepped closer, drawn to the rawness in his words. She had known loss, too. Perhaps not in the same way, but the loneliness, the ache in her chest, was a familiar feeling. She could see the years of resentment and hurt etched on his face, the same pain Mr. Grayson had carried. "I do know," she said softly, meeting his gaze. "I lost my mother, too. She died when I was young, and I was left with nothing but her memory." Damien's eyes flickered with something resembling surprise. For a brief moment, he seemed to soften, as if the walls he'd built around himself were cracking just a little. Laura took a step back, trying to give him space, but the words that followed were sharper than she expected. "Why now?" he asked, the bitterness creeping back into his voice. Why should I go see him now, after all these years? After everything he's done, does he really expect me to just walk in and pretend that nothing happened? The questions hung in the air unanswered as Damien crossed his arms, turning away from her. Laura knew there was more to his anger than just the years of abandonment. There was a deeper hurt, something she could only guess at. But what she didn't expect was the tenderness she saw when he spoke again, quieter this time. Maybe I don't want to see him. Maybe I want to know why he never looked for me. Laura felt a surge of hope. She had seen a shift, a small crack in Damien's armor. It was a start, but there was still so much pain to work through. Come with me, Laura urged. You deserve answers. And he deserves to know you. Damien hesitated, but only for a moment. His shoulders slumped slightly, as if the weight of the years had finally become too much to carry alone. All right, he muttered, looking up at Laura with a mixture of disbelief and reluctant acceptance. I'll go, but don't think I'm doing it for him. I'm doing it for me. Laura gave a small nod, the tiniest smile tugging at the corner of her lips. That's all that matters. The drive back to the mansion was quiet. Neither spoke much, the tension between them hanging in the air. But Laura could feel something shifting within Damien, a softening in his resolve. The anger that had gripped him so tightly seemed to be loosening, just a little, with every mile they traveled. When they arrived at the mansion, the towering structure loomed before them, imposing and silent. It had been a world that had once felt so far removed from her, a place of wealth and power where she had always been invisible. But now it felt different, almost as though she, too, had a stake in the life that existed within these walls. Damien seemed lost in thought as they walked up to the door, his steps heavy with hesitation. Laura could see the conflict in his eyes, the battle between wanting to confront his past and being afraid of what it might mean. Do you think it's worth it? He asked, his voice quieter than before. Laura didn't need to ask what he meant. She had seen it in his eyes since the moment they met. The fear confronting a father who had abandoned him. The fear of opening wounds that had been buried for so long. I think you deserve peace, she said gently, placing a hand on his arm. And I think he needs you, whether or not he's ready to admit it. As the door to the study creaked open, the air in the room seemed to shift. Mr. Grayson sat in his chair, a frail figure in the dim light, looking more like a shadow of the powerful man he once was. The once imposing billionaire was now reduced to a man desperately holding on to the remnants of his life and his regrets. Laura stood quietly beside Damien, watching as he took in the sight of his father. The tension was palpable, Damien's anger still simmering beneath the surface, Mr. Grayson's desperate vulnerability filling the space between them. For a long moment, neither man moved. It was as though time itself had come to a standstill, the weight of their shared history pressing down on them. Then, finally, Mr. Grayson spoke. His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. Damien, the name felt like a foreign thing on his lips. You've come. Damien stood motionless in the doorway, his jaw clenched tight, his fists at his sides. His eyes, though filled with pain, were sharp with the intensity of years of unresolved anger. He took one step forward, then another, but stopped just short of his father's chair. The distance between them felt like a chasm, one that had taken years to create. I've heard your apologies, Damien said, his voice steady but cold. But apologies don't erase the past. They don't undo the damage you've done. Mr. Grayson's eyes filled with tears, his hands trembling as he reached out, almost as if he were afraid to touch his son, afraid that any contact would be met with rejection. I know, he whispered. I've spent my whole life trying to undo what I've done, but I can't. All I want is a chance to be with you again before I go. Please let me make it right. The emotion in Mr. Grayson's voice cut through the room like a knife. It was raw, unguarded, and so unlike the man who had once built an empire with ruthless ambition. He had never shown this side of himself before, not even to his own son. Damien's gaze softened just a fraction, though the anger still lingered beneath the surface. You can't just fix it by saying sorry. You left me. You chose your empire over me. And for years, I had to live with that. Laura watched in silence, her heart aching for both of them. She had never seen Mr. Grayson like this, so broken, so open, and she could feel the weight of Damien's words, the truth that had shaped his life and left scars deep within him. But there was something in the air now, something shifting between them. The walls Damien had built around his heart were starting to crack. I never stopped loving you, Mr. Grayson said, his voice barely audible. I was a fool. I thought if I could just have everything, it would make up for what I lost. But I was wrong. And now, I have nothing left but the chance to make things right. The silence stretched between them once more, heavy and thick. Damien stood there, his emotions swirling, anger, betrayal, and something else, something softer, though he couldn't quite name it. Laura stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. Damien, it's not about fixing the past. It's about being here now, being with each other, in whatever way you can. You don't have to forgive him all at once, but you owe it to yourself to see him, to hear him. Damien's eyes flicked to Laura, then back to his father. His chest rose and fell with every breath, the battle raging within him. Finally, with a quiet exhale, he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know if I can forgive you, he admitted, his eyes locked on Mr. Grayson. But I'll listen. I'll hear you. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a beginning. Mr. Grayson's expression softened, and for the first time, he looked truly vulnerable, like a man who had finally accepted that he couldn't undo the past, but he could still reach out, still make an effort to heal the wounds he had caused. Thank you, Mr. Grayson whispered, his voice cracking with relief. That's all I need. A chance. The tension in the room began to ease, but the air was still thick with unspoken emotions. Mr. Grayson's frail hand shook slightly as he reached for the glass of water on the table, his once commanding presence now replaced by the vulnerability of a man facing his own mortality. Laura watched the two of them in silence, feeling the weight of the moment. They were both living in the aftermath of years of silence and regret. But this was the beginning of something new. She had played her part in bringing them together, but it was now up to them to decide what came next. Damien stood at the edge of the room, his gaze fixed on Mr. Grayson, his expression unreadable. The anger had faded, replaced by a mixture of confusion and curiosity. He wasn't ready to forgive, but he was willing to listen, and for now that was enough. Tell me, Damien finally said, his voice low but steady. Tell me everything. I want to know who you really are. Mr. Grayson nodded slowly, his eyes brimming with tears. He took a deep breath, as if gathering the strength to finally speak the truth. I've spent my entire life hiding behind my wealth, my success. I thought that if I could build an empire, I could make up for the things I lost. But I was wrong. I hurt the people I loved the most. I pushed them away because I thought I could control everything, except love, except you. His words hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. For the first time, Mr. Grayson wasn't hiding behind his wealth or his status. He was just a man, stripped bare, seeking forgiveness of the son he had failed. I didn't know how to be a father, Mr. Grayson continued, his voice shaking. I thought I could make up for it with money, but it was never enough. I never should have let you go. I should have found you. Damien's jaw tightened, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Vulnerability, mingled with something else, a softening of the hard exterior he had built over the years. Laura stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. You don't have to forgive him today, Damien, but at least let him have this moment. Let him tell you what he never could before. The room was silent as the weight of those words sank in. Mr. Grayson's eyes never left his son, and in that moment, Damien seemed to realize something. Maybe it wasn't about forgiveness. Maybe it was just about understanding, about accepting that they were both flawed and human, and that their pain was not something they could fix in a single moment, but something they could begin to heal together. Damien nodded slowly, a flicker of acceptance in his gaze. "I'm listening," he said quietly. In that moment, Mr. Grayson's heart seemed to lift. The relief was palpable, as though the years of regret were finally being lifted from his shoulders. He knew he couldn't undo the past, but at least he could leave this world knowing that Damien understood. The days that followed were a blur of emotional conversations, some quiet and filled with painful honesty, others more lighthearted, as father and son began to reconnect in the small moments that made up their shared history. Damien still held his reservations, still harbored the anger that came from years of neglect. But there was a shift, a quiet understanding, a mutual respect that began to form between them. Laura, who had witnessed it all, felt a deep sense of closure. She had helped Mr. Grayson fulfill his last wish, not by fixing everything, but by allowing him the chance to heal the broken bond with his son. But as much as the past had been painful, the future seemed just a little more hopeful. The mansion, once a place of cold silence, now felt a little warmer, filled with the sounds of new beginnings. Mr. Grayson had found peace, and in doing so, he had passed a piece of that peace on to his son. The two men, though scarred, had taken the first steps toward a new relationship, one that wasn't defined by the past, but by the hope of something more. As Laura stood outside the study, watching them speak in the distance, she couldn't help but reflect on her own journey. She had come to this mansion as an invisible figure, someone who was never seen, never heard. But now, as she looked at the father and son in front of her, she realized that her role in their healing was just as important. She had helped them find each other again, and in doing so, she had found her own sense of purpose. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was someone who had made a difference. And for the first time, that realization brought her a sense of peace. The days after Mr. Grayson's death were quieter than Laura had anticipated. The mansion, once filled with tension and the heavy weight of unspoken truths, now felt like a place of calm. Even the walls seemed to breathe a little easier, as if they, too, had been waiting for the moment when the emotional storm would finally pass. Damien, though still guarded, had taken over his father's estate, albeit reluctantly. He hadn't fully forgiven Mr. Grayson. He wasn't ready for that, but he had accepted that the man he had once hated so deeply had made his peace. It was a long road ahead for Damien, but at least he wasn't walking alone anymore. Laura had returned to her room in the servants' quarters, but the space felt different now. There was no longer a sense of isolation, no longer the heavy weight of being invisible. She had played a part in something profound, something that had changed the course of a family's future. She remembered the first night she had been called to the study, the fear and uncertainty that had gripped her. She had been unsure, terrified of stepping into a world so far beyond her reach. But now she understood. Sometimes it wasn't the grand gestures that mattered. It was the small things, the quiet moments when you reached out, when you showed up for someone who needed you. That was what had made the difference. As Laura stood in front of the grand mirror in her room, she looked at her reflection for the first time in a long while. The woman who stared back was different, changed, stronger, with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. She wasn't a maid in the shadows anymore. She had become something more, something important. The final weeks of her time in the mansion had been bittersweet. She had helped mend a broken family, a task that no one else could have accomplished. And though the mansion's halls would once again fall silent, Laura knew she had made her mark. She had found her purpose, and it had been one that transcended mere service. she had helped him heal, and in doing so had healed herself. Laura left the mansion quietly one afternoon, her bags packed, ready to move on, as she stood in front of the gates. Looking back at the house she had spent so many years in, she couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. This chapter of her life was over, but the lessons she had learned, the importance of forgiveness, of connecting, of healing, would stay with her forever. With a final glance at the mansion that had once been her entire world, Laura walked away, ready for whatever new beginning awaited her.